Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. Today, we warm up with why identity work doesn't require integration, but digestion, rather, and how that's different. We then continue our conversation from last time to complete Edenity's challenge of traditional therapeutic boundaries and move on to cover the hugely significant resolution of revelatory versus relative morality. There is a way to contain both, and finish with a discussion of the universality of codependence, because if you've been listening to all of the episodes so far, we know you just can't get enough of that topic. Thanks so much for listening. Greetings and welcome forward, everybody. This is number 91, which is a cool number. Hello, Stace.
Whoa, greetings. Wow, 91. I'm always, these days I'm so much translating the spiritual now into the human now. It's hard for me to remember things, not because I'm getting senile, but because I'm humanizing my access to nowness. So all there is now. So when you say 91, I'm reminded joltingly that we've gone 90 before this. So wow.
Yeah, it doesn't seem real. The only reason I remember is because I have a big long Google Doc with all of the episodes in it to keep me on track. And I'm also now, it hit me a couple of days ago, counting down the episodes now. I was thinking, so that makes it what? I mean, we're going to probably take a break when you're traveling, but we're within shooting distance of getting to drink while recording the podcast. And I already started playing. I'm like, I don't want to drink in the middle of the day. So we're going to have to do a special evening event.
Okay.
And invite listeners to drink along with us. Who knows? Maybe we'll even make it a simulcast, but I doubt it.
Oh, that would be interesting.
That would, yeah. Have people join us. I don't know. At the moment, that seems too technologically steep a challenge for me. But a lot can happen in 10 or 12 weeks.
Yes, that's right.
So today we are going to attempt to finish, or not attempt, we're going to foray into finishing Principle 10 from last time, where we talked about traditional rigid client, therapist-client boundaries and how they don't apply in the same way to Identity Land. And also...
Identity Land.
Identityville, Identityburg,
yes.
I don't know, if you will. And maybe get on to 11, 12, and 13. We'll see. But before we dive into that, I just had an insight that I thought might be interesting to talk about. And surely will make it less likely for us to finish what we intended to talk about. But arising things are good to deal with. And I was just thinking how I don't think I've talked about the 5 weeks I was in the Bardo in my own personal life on the podcast, but I'm just finishing a very, very challenging time where I was experiencing a lot of what I kept reminding myself was the Holy Grail in personhood practice, to experience the terrors of being, not being, and non-being. And it was so bad feeling that it really took a lot of self-reminders, like, this is good, this is good, this is good, while a part of me was like, this is what? Are you kidding me? But now on the sort of, quote, integration side of it, where, to use your metaphor, the flames are out, but the embers are still burning. It hit me how, because I touched upon these terrors in other ways, most notably with the help of ayahuasca a number of times, and it hit me how in other realms like therapy and in plant medicine worlds, people will talk about that they'll have views into their unconscious or views into divinity and insights about things. And then the conversation will be about, okay, now how do you integrate that into your life? And it hit me like...
Embody and integrate. Yeah, embody and integrate.
Yeah, right. And what hit me was, what I just went through there's nothing to integrate. And that's something, as far as I can tell, unique to Edenity. It's not, because it's not energy, insight, or revelation based. It's like, because it's accessing the soul, there's nothing to integrate. The experience and the integration are the same thing, because it's getting down to the soul level. Because when we say like, oh, I had this insight and now I need to integrate it, it's like we could decode that to mean, and tell me, because I'm thinking about all this in real time, tell me what you think about this. There's nothing to, how do I say this? When there's something to integrate, it means all of you didn't experience it yet.
Well, there's a couple of different ways to use that word, but that's one
Yeah,
way to use
depends
it.
on what you mean by integrate. But if it's like,
right.
oh, I got this about myself, or I had this experience and now I need to integrate it into my life, it points to that it may be, you know, of course it can be extremely valuable and it can change your life, but as long as there's something to integrate, then it's somehow separate. Then there's a distance there, and then there's something you have to do with it. But what we're always striving for is not having to do anything, not having to use will or intention or mind to make the insight embodied. It's like the governing dynamic of identity is if you feel it down at the soul level, then it just, you don't have to integrate it because you've likely deconstructed that which would be preventing you from integrating it in the first place.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And you're right. That is a linchpin in all three hoods in that way. In personhood, though, it takes on a little bit more edgy describability in the sense that we say in all the hoods, the feeling when you're down to existential terrors, not situational wounds to be healed. Existential terrors, terror of being, which is personhood, Dharma addresses that, terror of not being, which the non-dual pre-dual addresses, and the terror of non-being, which the relatedness with divinity covers. It's that we can say when it's at that level of the terrors, the existential terrors, the feeling of it is the healing of it.
Yeah,
as we say. And so you're right. That's a fine metaphysical point. I would not have thought to make that distinction, but you're exactly right. The feeling of it heals. It's not because you've subtracted the resistance to letting yourself to sink into the existential level terror of wounds that have already been worked situationally. So I would for me to see if this fits for you, I would use the term digest rather than integrate.
That's how it feels. Yeah, and then it just hit me based on what you said, that because with existential stuff, as we've been talking about so much, not on recordings, the feeling is the healing, and because the existential stuff is there's nothing you can do about it or with it.
Right.
So we just figure, okay, well, the feeling of it must be the healing of it, and then the payoff is there's nothing you can do about it to change how hard it is. But the payoff is there's nothing you have to do afterward either to integrate it, because it did it to you. And so I just also want to share, because I imagine some people are like, okay, so you just went through some kind of hell. What did you get for all of that? And that's certainly been something on my mind. And one thing I wanted to share that I'm starting to experience is relating with people used to seem like work. It used to seem like something I had to do. And now it seems like something that is automatically there, and I'm curious about it. And that sounds like not so significant, but it really is.
For most of us, it is so significant. Yes.
And I remember once, because I could be described as having some autistic tendencies, and I remember once being in a group of people, and I had this insight. That was an insight where I just saw like, oh, there's something that everybody here is doing very naturally. And I just somehow I have to work at that. Relating for me is like, it's uphill. It's not just something that automatically happens. And I'm starting to have experiences where it doesn't feel uphill at all. It feels very natural. And I'm not having to do it. And then I used to feel drained by being social. And now I don't want it to end sometimes. And that's a completely different me than I ever dreamed possible. So it's pretty exciting.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that, because we talk about, especially in this arc that we're in right now, we're talking about fundamental principles out of which the Dharma, or upon which the Dharma, which is different than the principles, the Dharma itself, is based. To have someone say what it is, what does it feel like to actually do the Dharma, and what do you get out of it? Your reveal here is really a beautiful testament to that. And I want to, if I can already hear people in the outside, in the unseen audience, boy, sometimes that's a burden, sometimes it's a blessing to be
I
able to
know,
feel
yeah.
what,
I know.
oh my God, yeah. Um, is that I've heard, believe it or not, in transpersonal psychology influenced New Age teachings. Oh, that was a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
They will say the feeling of it is the healing of it, even in situational, incarnative, childhood based traumas and issues. And we want to make a really clear distinction that that is not the case. There's an intervening element where Joseph himself, even though he works with resistances at this level after all the years he's been working, the feeling is the healing is when you're down into the existential version of the wounds, not the situational versions of the wounds,
Mm-hmm.
because then you've got to negotiate with the protector to
Yeah.
get to the wound. And in the existential, you don't. There's no negotiation.
Right.
It
Yes.
finds you. It
Yeah,
finds you.
yeah,
See?
so I'll fill that in because to back out the result here of what precipitated this more automatic relationality, what precipitated it was 5 weeks of feeling like every aspect of reality was invading me and being powerless to stop it, and making peace with that and feeling all of the terror coming up. And now, and I would not have predicted this, and now it's like, oh, I'm letting people in and not stopping them. And that's what produces relationality. But I had to wade through how could you relate with people and let them in and let them close if there's a terror of every aspect of reality, and people in some ways the most. But amidst all
Yes.
of that, people became the only way through it. Like
Yes.
because the terror was not modifiable. It was just all I could do is share it with people and be with people. And then my protector saw like, oh, people are the solution. But not really. They're just like not being alone with the terror was the solution. And now I'm just
Right.
automatically closer with people because they're not part of the terrifying invasiveness of reality, which is not objectively true, but
Yes.
was because of my deficient parenting. And now it goes
Yeah.
back and forth. I usually have about 3 or 4 hours every day where I'm sort of half of me, it feels like, is terrified of the invasiveness of reality rather than like 99.9%. And there's enough me here being like, okay, I know that tree is not going to dive into me and devour me. That's a projection, and it's okay to feel anyway. But it's making people so lovely, and that's great. That's so worth it.
Oh, it's so wonderful to hear you say that. And what's so important here is that when you, I'll reference it this way because Joseph has just been talking about healing the terror of being, translating the spirit to the human. In other words, I've asked people, well, or people have asked me, why not go right to the terror of the three existential terrors instead of wading through the years sometimes it takes to work through all the situational.
Mm-hmm.
And that question comes out of an upside down reality that's been bedeviling the human race in Edenity's opinion anyway since the beginning, because that's top down. In other words, you want to skip over the human. And the human is the situational, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, let's just go right for the existential. Let me just, in effect, let's skip over or transcend. Oh, my childhood is just a story I tell myself. That's how they frame it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in pre-dual, non-dual, it doesn't matter anyway. But in more new agey context, they want to skip it over too because they innocently don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
No amount of nominal psychological conditioning and or inner child work and or Brene Brown insight-driven energy is going to heal anything. They just illuminate things, not heal them.
Because they illuminate, then there's something to integrate. How do I
Yes,
become what it is I know or got? Yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, this is very timely that you self-reveal here, and we can make the distinctions that the critical importance between situational wounding from this lifetime and some para-personas, past life influences in coming into what we brought into the present incarnation.
Yeah.
Those all have to be handled differently.
And to add to what you just said, not only do we not skip over the situational childhood stuff and look for existential, we don't go looking for existential at all.
No, no.
When you get through a
Yes,
certain level of childhood stuff, it just shows up.
it
This
just
was not
shows
being
up.
looked for at all, which is another way
No,
it can be trusted.
exactly. There's no setup for it except in the framework way that we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
But experientially, you don't find these three terrors. They find you when you've done enough in all three hoods, saintly work, sagely work, and personal work, which all require a ton of working through stuff before the existential has room to find you, because they're like stones sitting over a geyser,
Yeah.
those situational wounds, and they've got to be melted away or taken away before the geyser of the existential starts bubbling up into our being.
And the fact that I wasn't looking for this made it all the more difficult and also real, because if you went looking for it, then there'd be a sort of sense of control about it.
Yes.
Instead of like, oh, this is all happening to me, which is what the existential terror feels like. So if you go looking for it, then you're not going to actually find what it is. There's an analog in I think we talked about recently in the pursuit of enlightenment. Eventually, the
Yeah.
seeker has to die, and then you
Yeah.
start to realize, you start to have the experience that the pre-dual is
Mhm.
trying to find you just as much as you were trying to
Yes.
find it. And there's this
Yes.
changeover where you're not pursuing it anymore; it's pursuing you, and then that's a whole different experience. Um, where because you have no control, and then it's not you
Exactly.
trying to be enlightened. That goes
Right.
away, and this new frame of, oh, something is trying to take me over, and
Yeah.
that's what brings up the fear of not being.
Beautifully said again. And one more
Thank you.
overview, and then we'll move on here.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joseph. That was wonderful. Is Identity is the only paradigm I know that segments these, identifies and segments the dharmas of the terrors of being, personhood, terrors of not being, sagehood, and terrors of non-being, sainthood. If you don't do that, it becomes like a whole blob of unboundaried, undifferentiated pain from joy stuff, or burden from liberation stuff. You've got to process them all down. So, because we've never had a paradigm that gave us this kind of picture, and then the dharmas to go along with it, we've all been struggling how to do the thing that is most important, and at least in the modern day now, is how to make the spirit, to humanize spirit and spiritualize the human. This was never possible while we're busy transcending the human, which is now finally getting into lots of non-dual, pre-dual things. But
Mm-hmm.
what they do with it is simply name calling it and smiling at it and not taking it seriously, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you.
And one of the things that made this possible for Joseph is that the principle we're talking about, traditionally rigid facilitant therapist boundaries, unnaturally prevent the human heart level connection necessary for true healing. He has lived that, in the sense that the facilitation he's gotten from me and from my wife Bree, mostly, especially the two of us, we don't have those rigid boundaries, and so there's a far deeper porosity of heart and soul that allows you, that is necessary to get to the existential.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can certainly therapize empathically
Mm-hmm.
as therapists, but resempathically requires soulful exchange, not just trauma exchange and kindness and empathy and sympathy. Res empathy, we had to make up a new word. I had to make up a new word for it. Is another way of saying it. Is it's the soulful closeness porosity that allows my soul to join Joseph's soul, and then together squeeze between us, the
That's what
two
elicits
souls
the
meeting.
existential stuff. Yeah.
And exactly right. And if a facilitator of some kind won't even go to the same grocery store as a client, they are never going to help them at the soul level. So, but here's the key: the only way that's possible without countertransference or too much transference, a mucky kind of too porous a boundary. And here's the point I wanted to make before moving on, is that it's only possible between people who have reached some minimum of emotive maturity,
Yeah.
soulful maturity. You can't break those boundaries that psychology was wise to have, because if you want to remember some of the earlier numbers here in our 13, we are all by default 2/3 of our inauthentic protective self, including therapists.
Yes.
So those rules are absolutely necessary for younger and even medium-aged souls. But for the stuff that's existentially accessible, at least in this lifetime now for us in the bandwidth we're in, requires a lot softer, more porous
Yeah,
boundaries.
and another way of saying that, I've heard Bree talk about it this way, that that the we have in our therapized collective conscious, and people who've done therapy, this idea of setting boundaries. And
Yeah.
we haven't talked like formally about this, but I've talked with Bree about it here and there, watching how she works and how she relates to boundaries. And what came to me while you were talking is that the soul doesn't relate to boundaries as a noun.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
you can feel through what is appropriate. So
Right.
like who or what is setting boundaries, that's very nounifying. And rather than feeling your way through, like, okay, here's an uncertain moment, and part of relationality is what is appropriate and fits and is true in one moment may not be the next.
Yeah, yes.
So how do you set boundaries like that? Like, there could be a moment where you see a facilitant in a grocery store and it just, for what's going on, makes sense not to go over and say hello. Or it might make sense to talk for a little bit, or it might make sense to talk for 10 minutes. It depends on what's going on. So as soon as you assert some kind of boundary, now you're not in reality. That would be the mind trying to look for some kind of set of rules. And that's, you're automatically out of reality then.
Yeah. Yeah. The one boundary, of course, that we don't cross is sexual. That is never crossed in any of the three hoods. So that's the only one. But otherwise, heartful and soulful commiseration, where it's not a noun, the boundary, it's a verb, it's a river that changes depending on the flow moment, as Joseph just said. So I just wanted to make that point before we moved on, that you need to be
and I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up. And that's what we need from parents, not a set of rules, but a level of heartful engagement such that they're relationally feeling through how to be with us. That's how we would learn relationality. But if it's, you can do this, but not that, and we can't feel that the boundaries are connected to us and actually in our self-interest, if we can't feel that, well, then we grow up wanting to nounify relationality and nounify boundaries. And that's just not how it is.
Take note here, listeners. What Joseph just brought in here is so compelling. I'm glad you did. What Edenity offers, why we all are 2/3 inauthentic, emotively inauthentic, is because, as we said so often, we don't actually get the soul nourishment we need in childhood, and that looks very different than behaviors. So what a good parent, an emotively mature parent, can do, if they were able to do that, no one would ever need psychology or facilitation.
Right.
So in this changeover time, where Edenity is planting seeds for that whole new paradigm for healing of all sorts, the facilitator that in this case, Bree, that Joseph was referring to, is much like what was should have happened with parents but didn't. But so we can create that now with appropriate boundaries, exactly like there's appropriate boundaries for parents and children don't don't have sex with each other. Well, too often they do, but that's the parents' fault completely. So this is the same boundary. It just struck me. I never made that said that out loud. It's
there
the
has
same
to
boundary.
be there's a homeopathy to that, and that's the essence of what the traditional boundaries exclude. It's like, because you have to get as close to recapitulating, reenacting, that's too artificial a word, represencing, refeeling what a connection with an authority who is supposed to be feeling you. You have to get as close as you can to that in order to allow reparenting to happen. So then any boundary that prevents that kind of intimacy would have to be looked at really carefully. And
very carefully. Yeah, you can't, if you're hearing this, you can't take this to your therapist and say, hey, I want softer boundaries with you.
They won't be able to do it.
No, and if they try, it'll even make it worse. So
it has to be something that they are as a result of their own healing.
Exactly, not for what they do, just like with parenting.
Right.
Okay, good. I think that exhausts that. Now we go into philosophy. So this is going to be enticingly interesting to some people and not so enticingly to others. But it's an important point here, because here is where personhood, how can I say, holographically, holoarchically, provides rabbit holes to philosophy. Not just how we are as human, it is a philosophical statement, and I'll talk about that right now.
We're talking about 11 now.
Yes,
I thought we talked a little bit about 11 last time, didn't we?
We did a little, but we didn't. We just referenced it.
Okay.
A state of emotive maturity. A state of emotive maturity, which is a new benchmark that we've never had before. Emotive maturity that the Edenity offers reveals. And this was so interesting. We did talk about it, but we got to talk just a bit more. It reveals an inherent moral code that's a universal ethic of human life, the lack of which has resulted in, well, the unembodiable and divisive revelatory-based religious morality systems, and modern relative-based secular moral systems. In other words, religious stuff is top down, the Ten Commandments, blah, 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 is given to us by God, burned into the stone and Moses received it. We talked about the burning bush being something other than just a burning bush.
The psychotropic burning bush.
Yes. But the point here is that we've got two moral systems governing the world in a simplistic but compelling way. Revelatory-based moral systems and ethical systems, and revelatory, revelatory based in scripture and religion, and relative based in humanistic moral systems.
You often called moral relativism.
Moral relativism, thank you. And the best way to describe the difference is here in revelatory, it's here's what's right and here's what's wrong. And in human moral systems, it's, well, what is right can sometimes have a lot of different expressions, and what's wrong can have a lot of different expressions. Just because the same action happens, the reasons these same actions happen can differ so wildly between people. Someone robbing a bank and shooting a teller and running away from the money, running away with the money, and as we said before, someone stealing a loaf of bread and running out the door of a grocery store to feed their child. There's similar stealings, and so they would both be sinful in a revelatory religionism point of view. But in a human moral relativism, the intention in moral relativism, humanism, is why you do what you're doing, not just focus on the what you do, which religionism does, right? So these are the two moral systems, and boy, they are at war right now. Just take up the problems Francis the Pope is trying to do in adding some moral relativism into Catholicism's religion revelatory based dogmatism, right? The poor guy, he's going a little, he's on the end of his incarnation here, so it's getting a little sloppy, but so what? What he's trying to do futilely is still a moral goodness from Edenity's point of view, as clumsy as he is in it.
Well, that's observable anytime you see someone on the religious revelatory side trying to introduce relativism. It doesn't work. And vice versa, when you find an atheist or something trying to find some kind of essential morality when they don't have a worldview to draw upon that has any kind of spirit or divinity, and it looks just as silly. So what we're talking about here is the unintegratability of those two things. And if you were in, just a preview here, because I think I know where Stace is going, if you were a grad student in philosophy, you would be extremely interested in Edenity because it resolves a millennia-old split between revelatory-based philosophies and spiritualities and religions and relativism. They don't go together, and it's observable that there are truths in both.
Yes.
So how do they go together? I don't know a philosophy besides Edenity that has a way for them to go together, and that's philosophically a big deal, and why it really pisses a part of me off that no university has taken any interest in Edenity, even on an academic level. Like, it deserves to be studied, you know.
Yeah, and so you're exactly right where I was going to go with this. Thanks for the preview. And here's what we'll give some. Now we'll give something to the real philosophically acute here. Religion's revelatory-based moral systems are a priori. Here it is. It comes down from above. They are the assumed default. There's no negotiation with them.
And that would be the same as essentialism, right? That there's
exactly, yeah, just another
we talked
term
about,
for it.
I don't know, 10, 15 episodes ago.
Right. Now, but now that's a priori. What human relativism, if we go another level of acute philosophical talk, they are a posteriori.
Yeah.
After the fact, along with the fact of the deed, of the behavior that's sinful or bad, comes a secondary analysis of why, a posteriori. In other words, we can't judge the fact that the person stole a loaf of bread until we figure out what his intention was. That's a posteriori, whereas it doesn't matter in religious moral systems. A priori, it's a sin. That's it. And the way Edenity, and this is, to me, it's a really underemphasized, unbelievable contribution Edenity has, and I'm proud to have been the author of it, is that it ameliorates these two, because these are never the twain shall meet. And it's all based on the fact, even though intention, the conscious intention is really cool, that moral relativism includes that. There's a deeper level of unconscious motive.
Right. And it's because where revelatory stuff focuses on the action. We talked about this in the last episode, or this episode before, the 4 elements of human behavior: unconscious motive, intention, action, and outcome. So the younger form of teaching in religion was based on controlling actions-based morality. Yes. And then it evolved to intention-based morality, which is secular humanism and moral relativism. And they don't connect because there's actually a deeper level, which, again, this is... Right now, there would be millions of philosophy students who would be really excited about this idea, and it's just really frustrating that they don't have it.
Tell me about it.
Even if they didn't want to live it, it would answer lots of cool philosophical questions, you know?
I did send a book that these 13 premises, there's a whole book that takes each of these premises and explains all of them. It's called No Such Thing as a Negative Emotion. And I sent that to a university once, years ago, and was so excited to do so, because they attempt this particular university tends to try to link spiritual stuff with philosophical stuff. It has a whole course outline about that. And I was so hopeful I'd receive something. It just fell into the black hole of academia. At any rate,
Yeah.
what the game changer here is that when you seek and find the unconscious motive, which EBE personhood Dharma does do fairly slickly and wonderfully, by an interesting dharmic elements, you find that the unconscious motive that underlies the conscious intention is the unifier. Because what you do, instead of being a priori religious and mystical kinds of philosophies and
Essentialist
essentialists and moral relativists,
and
is that
existential.
a priori, a posteriori.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is a cute little term, a processiori. In other words, you process your way to your morality. In other words, in some moments, there will be a moral stricture that a revelational based system would say, "Oh yeah, that we can live with that." And at the same time that they say that, the moral relativists would also say, "Oh, I can live with that too." In other words, there's finally a union, not a union, but an amelioration of the schism between religious ethical systems and moral values and humanistic.
Yeah, it
And you would
includes both
it
without negating
includes
either.
both
Mm-hmm.
without exactly. And to me, that is the philosophical foundation for why Edenity is so able to help finally heal the schism between spirit and human.
And why it makes sense that no philosophy prior to, well, certainly the 20th century could come up with
Right.
that is because it requires the existence of the unconscious, which is,
Yes.
125 years old or something.
Yeah, we're barely as a global. I mean, how many as a global population of the planet? 3% of the planet, in my experience, 3 to 5, if I'm in a good mood, actually applies psychology to their everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many movies do we see, Joseph? Rom-coms especially, where has anyone ever heard of therapy? When they're playing for comic roles, they have people doing outrageously wound-based things and justifying them to
Yeah, I
themselves.
remember what pops into my mind is, can I remember? What's that one? Oh man, I'm gonna blank on it. It was it Meryl Streep, the mother who had a problem with Q-tips, and her son was dating her client. Remember that one?
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
She was a therapist. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
was that
And
Meryl
she had
Streep?
a son. Right. That's Meryl Streep. Right.
I do remember the name of the film.
I
I can't.
don't.
I
I don't.
can't.
But I
I
mean,
can't remember. Other than like she didn't. She didn't want her patient dating her daughter, or was it her son? I can't remember.
her
And
son. Her
her
son.
son. And she was like sort of intervening, and she had this knowledge and was like talking to her patient with the knowledge and not being transparent about that. I was like, this woman should lose her license for that. And everybody's just laughing along with like, oh, how funny this is. And like, no, that's completely not okay.
Exactly. So there's so many things we could talk about a little bit more in this domain, but the high point I just wanted to make here in terms of this array of 13 for personhood is that the philosophical underpinnings, when this finally ameliorated in my heart and my mind years and years ago, and I put a spin to it, and then after the spin, the foundation of it, to me it legitimates. It's a legitimization that happens at the level of philosophical contexts that so many paradigms lack the ability to. They just don't have a philosophical underpinning, or they're not conscious of it, or they don't make it clear enough. Like we say about non-dual, pre-dual teachings,
Mm-hmm.
the gurus don't tell you that the self being illusion means also all relationship is an illusion. Because how do two illusory beings have anything but an illusory kind of connect?
Mm-hmm.
They don't tell you that all relationships will fundamentally change. And that's why they split 2 and 4 so often, like Osho did, transcended the human, and then on the other side, overcompensated and had orgy parties as a way to bust the ego, as a way to bust the ego's preferences. Right. So in that sense, he was lacking an ability to have a philosophical human-based foundation to his paradigm, and simply went excess to excess, too much transcendence, too much overdue on the other side, with sexual boundaries being violated by the guru having sex all the time with his devotees. So in this sense, I am so inordinately proud of this number 11 here in our linchpins.
But it really cracks a code of I mean, there's finding an objective, but also we used to use the term transjective or
transjective. Yes.
Yeah, something that is both objective, unifying the objective and the subjective, so that the individual thoughts, feelings, experiences can be integrated into a objective set of, this is how we ought to live as humans, to be able to combine those in a way that appeals to people's self-interest and is experientially okay and good, that people like, and they don't feel controlled by it or stifled. I mean, that's, if that's the only thing you did, it would be quite remarkable.
I get, this is the one thing I have the least space to actually talk about, because not many people are philosophically deeply attuned to the significance of what you just said.
Yeah.
Let me connect with what Joseph just said.
Because you have to study philosophy for a good year or two to be able to understand the significance of this. Because this is one of the problems that all philosophers have been trying to solve.
It's the one, they're all trying to solve it all these thousands of years. The religious point of view, the dogmatic one, is the objective, and the moral relativist is the subjective. And from what Joseph just used there, and this, an a processiori utilizes, combines subjectivity and objectivity into a really elegantly, a philosophically elegant, dynamical embodiment. So at one point, I remember very clearly, after this one came to me and I codified it, I was, I didn't know what to do with my next step in my unfoldment of the paradigm. At that time, I said, should I go get my PhD in philosophy so that I get some kind of postgraduate credibility for this one element? And so like I do all the time, I asked Divine Being, should I add that to my DV, what's the
CV, curriculum
CV,
vitae?
Yeah, should I add that to it? And I felt it, a big sigh, and a big sigh from him, and said, so respectfully, but really just the big sigh, put away the toys. That was the answer. Put away the mental toys, in other words, and don't worry about it. But part of me wanted to just teach nothing else but this the rest of my life.
Yeah, and it's seductive, but I think, that we could talk for an hour about why academia isn't interested in it. I think one of the things is they're not interested actually in embodying a set of values or a way of living. And most people who study philosophy are interested in thinking about stuff and don't even understand the difference between thinking about something and embodying it. They don't even get that there's a difference. That's how off the radar it is of academia.
Good point. Yeah. Remember that thinking, which philosophy thinks about thinking. You could say that's a definition of philosophy. It's an abstraction of an abstraction.
Yeah.
It abstracts experience, which is an experience is an abstraction of objective reality. So
Hmm.
you've got a double two steps out of the actual objective reality of the world in
Yeah.
philosophy, because like Sartre had a different dynamical childhood and stuff than
Yeah.
Nietzsche did, and so they're going to have differing philosophies. But the point we made last time that I now want to hammer home to complete
Wait,
this.
before you go there, I want to add something. I have a half sister who's a professor of the history of psychology at Stanford, and a college friend who's a philosophy professor at Villanova. And you hear professors say this very often. When they're interviewed about stuff, they'll use this phrase again and again. I'm interested in. I'm interested in. They're not talking about who they want to become or what
Yeah,
change they want to bring to the world or how they want to help people be different. They're just talking about what they like thinking about. And that's
that's what.
academia. I like thinking about it's like a 12-year-old. I like thinking about planes and airplanes, trains and things like that's how young it is. And they've like left off the table the possibility of human potential. That it's divorced from that.
Yeah, religionists are like, bless their heart, young kids,
Yeah, younger than
children,
10.
and yes, younger than 10. And philosophers are like teenagers who think they've figured it all out just by thinking about shit,
Yeah. Hmm.
uh, and so in this sense, the reason where the rubber meets the road here, as we say so often in Joseph's podcast here, so
Our podcast.
that is that this is why people who undergo healing almost to the edges existential, at least in the neighborhood of the existential, in all three hoods, all start having the same value system.
Hmm.
Not because we set out to do it in the first place, but here's where the cherry goes on the pie, because it proves that this a processiori form of philosophical unity of dogmatism and relativism, right in the middle of it, it must be humanly applicable, not just philosophically, but embodyingly. Because the more you embody healing in identity, all of a sudden we start liking. We may have different tastes in films occasionally and in food occasionally, but that's about it.
I
Uh,
remember,
the,
I remember vividly the movie Her, the Scarlett Johansson and Will
yeah,
Ferrell movie. I remember
yeah,
vividly you were doing a teaching day and you were talking about that film and you said it's almost, I think I got these words exactly right because it really made an impression on me. You said it was a wonderful film that we hated.
yes,
And I remember being like, oh my God, that was my reaction too. It was like really well
yeah,
done and deeply
yeah,
disconcerting at the same time. And that's
yeah,
an example of
yes,
what embodying your way to these transjective values does. You just end
yeah,
up processing reality the same way. And, you know, it certainly could be that we're unconsciously entraining ourselves to all look at reality in the same way in some cultic will-based way. But it doesn't look like it. I mean, that's always a possibility.
yeah. And so, yeah, oh, this is the shining gem in one way for me that I could have built a whole career on, just this one premise as
Mm-hmm.
a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, I want to recap and move on to the next one by simply ending this one by saying I had to walk away from three careers: a medical based career first, a singer songwriter based career second, and one that really pinched and hurt just as much as the other two, walking away from a philosophical a PhD career that I could have done in 2 years because of all the other stuff that I'd done. Um, I had to walk away from all three of them because Divine Being kept telling me, no, 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 you have to come from a whole other dimension of orientation to human existence. And you can't get channeled into one or two or even three of them. There were three that I really wanted to be
Mm-hmm.
in my younger years and then middle age years and then a little older years. So, but I'm happy that we can at least I give myself a little bit of warmth and appreciation here for this particular premise, which is so philosophically real to me. And what, as Joseph said, ameliorates classical with modern and postmodern philosophy. All of them have some venue
Mhm.
in Edenity's a processiori
I mean, it's the
basis.
kind of thing that in college philosophy you'll study both of those sides, and
Yeah,
the way the non-resolution of it is that it's like, well, there's some philosophers come at it from essentialism and some from existentialism, and that's it, and nobody's resolved that, and like that's
no,
the academic story, and I want to be like, no, there's a way they could go together. I mean, it's like, finding, all of the digits of pi or something, or I mean, it's no less significant than knowing that the earth goes
uh,
around the sun. It's a really, really big deal.
it is, and it only dawns on people that it is that after they actually go into the and verify it experientially,
Yeah.
and then abstract it. It's an abstraction. This is an abstraction, but it's an abstraction that does not obfuscate the embodiment. In fact, it supports the embodiment.
Yeah, well,
And
because
so
the
it,
the
oh,
resolution of existentialism versus essentialism is the
yes,
soul. They can't
yes,
go together in the mind. But when you
no, they can't.
become minimally your own soul, they just go
Yeah,
together, and you start
yeah,
processing reality that way. And that's amazing, except for the
yeah.
fact that just about everybody else looks extremely confused, especially especially when you read the news. That part's not so easy to bear, because people are circling in completely unnecessary confusions in one way, and that's just really sad. Where they're,
Oh, isn't that our pain, Joseph?
mm-hmm.
That they keep circling in impotent solutions when we know we're in position, we're in possession of something that would ameliorate their suffering.
And in the meta of
Um,
things, like they haven't dead ended their thing yet,
yeah,
so they're on their
yeah,
learning path as well. It's not to judge them, but it sure would be nice to have more Identity fans speaking selfistly. I
sure.
would like it.
Yeah, me too. But we're just barely, all of us, getting to some minimum places of embodying the paradigm
Yeah.
in all three hoods. And you've got to do all three hoods in one lifetime to get what we're saying in terms of what's possible to embody in any one life. And some of these people have been in it 15, 20 years working all three hoods because that's how long the issues about them have accrued and need amelioration and healing about to embody. I just last thing here. I was guided. I did a reading for an amazing being who lives in Portugal. She knows who she is. I sent on a whim that was I realized later was a guidance. I sent her the 13, and she wrote back, and I hope this is okay. Yeah, because I'm not identifying her. It was tears in her eyes reading these because they spoke. She's a Lucifile angel, also like myself, in my opinion, and Bree, and tears in her eyes, and that confirmed it to me that she's a Lucifilite in one way, because the way she, without needing any prep, and the significance of these 13, she gestalted them, and it was like this in what I got from her in her tears was she just said she was reduced to tears, and what I could feel, what she meant by that is that finally someone is validating the weird person I am, or she because she connected with all of these to some degree, greater and lesser degree, I assume, but they circumscribed a worldview
Yeah.
that she finally could find herself in.
Right.
And that's what the whole point of identity is out there, folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's to give you a worldview for why you feel different than
Yeah.
all other people or most people you meet in all these domains: philosophical,
Yeah.
spiritual, emotional, mental.
Because an old soul has been going back and forth between revelatory morality and relative
Yes,
morality. And if they've
right,
done that enough times,
right.
they look at the two and they go, I'm done. I can't do that. So they're
Yeah,
implicitly and intuitively looking for something that unifies that, even though they don't necessarily
yeah.
know that, because the split
Oh,
between human and divine is just, it's a wound in them. And so
yeah.
they can't do one or the other, because they just know, because they've been there and done that. But if they can't find a
Oh,
resolution to that, then they just suffer with it, and they don't really know what it is.
yeah. And I wish I could have met Billy Graham before he passed, because here's I promise the last one on this. We'll move
All right.
on. You just reminded me of it right there, so it's your fault.
Okay.
Uh, um, where this middle unity between essentialism and existentialism is a good way to headline both of them, is that Edenity deeply respects Billy Graham, a dyed-in-the-wool revelationist, dyed-in-the-wool Christian, no negotiation. That is it. That's reality. But where we can meet with him was that he had an integrity about his orientation to his paradigm that was not egotistic. And so many televangelists and evangelists, Joel, what's his name, that has a mega church, all these white-teethed, bushy-haired, televangelistic, just give me money, and that because I represent God, God will give you money back because you give money to me, his representative on earth. Billy Graham was so quiet. He was passionate, but he always had an air of, well, this is the way it lives for me. I hope you find it someday. He never pushed it, and that's how I can have respect for him, even though I completely do not share his paradigm of spirituality, much less be based on Jesus, other than being just a regular guy who was inspiring, but just a regular sperm egg guy. So I just wanted to put and give some shout out to Billy. His son, I don't know so well, but who's carrying on. But I wish I could have met Bill because I would have I could shake his hand, where I can't even be in the same room without working a lot of finding my heart and soul and acceptance with some of these televangelists who say, based in send me money and God will send you money. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to shout out to Bill. All right, now here's one, and it's really another linchpin one. The way we transact romance, sexualized intimacy, and relationship always involves projections of unmet dependent needs from childhood onto your adult partner. And until those wounds are healed, no relationship theory or therapy will ever support healthy, authentic, non-codependent, interdependent intimacy. And again, we harken back why the earlier premises build towards some of these last ones. By default, we're all emotively inauthentic. The only way you can say that you are authentic is emotively authentic, soulfully authentic, is if your parents were emotively mature before they had you. Since there were there's a range, but no parent ever in the history of humankind has ever had an ability to transmute themselves into an soulfully emotive, mature person before they ever had kids. That's okay. It wasn't time. No criticism of parents. But in that sense, if by default, all of us are 2/3 our protector selves, which is an armor against our emotive, soulful authenticity, then our armorers are getting together. And that's what Edenity calls codependence. When our wound-based protectors do the dance of intimacy, which is by default, everyone. Doesn't matter if you're LGBTQIA+, if you're straight out, I'm so naturally hetero. I forget the name for my own modern way of relating.
Yeah, because straight's not okay anymore. Straight's too biased for that.
Yeah, cisgender.
Yeah. Or if you're on your fifth spouse, doesn't matter. Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Or if you're poly, doesn't matter. Or if
doesn't matter.
It's just because we're emotive beings first.
Yeah, and that's the whole point here. We're emotive beings before we're any other kind of being, and you could add emoto soulful, soulful in parentheses. Until you heal at that level, your armorer, your protectors will be in romance, and that is by definition codependent. The projection of unmet dependent needs that were not provided by your parents, creating a protector version of yourself, having romantic intimacy whether it's no matter what form it is, you're going to be codependent. And that's a really strict definition of codependence. It's not just at the level of behavior, which a lot of codependent models are. And so what we would say about that is that you can't do healthy intimacy till you have a healthy self. Now, that's not such a life-changing insight. There are versions of that out there in therapy land, mostly. But what we're talking about is an emotively authentic self. Only one emotively authentic self can have an emotively authentic relationship with another.
And then to add on top of that and to sort of invert all of what you just said in another way, we would say that the point of romantic connection is in large part to illuminate that codependence so that you can follow the breadcrumb trail back to your wounds, that's actually by design. So when people, we inherently, a romantic relationship inherently has as a feature a design that is supposed to show you your childhood wounds, which people then don't want to look at and still, quote, make the relationship work. And that just makes it, you can either compromise or let the thing die on the vine or break up, or it just doesn't work at all.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that's the next dimension about this I wanted to talk to. You always anticipated here, Joseph. It's so wonderful. And that is that you're drawn to your partner, whatever gender, whatever it is, or non-gender, or whatever it is, because you share similar wounds that your protector is protecting. Mm-hmm. That's the first and foremost thing.
And that's what you discover when the honeymoon is over and suddenly there's all these issues. The high of falling in love was covering why you drew the person in the first place, and then they eventually have to be dealt with.
Absolutely. Now, I'll use Bree and I as a great example of this. As we were falling in love, I could sense it in her and she could sense it in me. Maybe our third month together, we both came to the conclusion and finally made a discussion about, we made it patent. We both had the identical reality. Wait, what's happening here? We don't feel in love like I didn't feel in love with her in the same way that she didn't feel in love with me, based on the past, where there was this heart flutter. After there was a bit of heart flutter, but not much. It was more like two souls were meeting each other, and actually that was the case. And we realized after we talked about it that this meant it was freaking healthier, that we didn't have that falling in love stupor thing that people live their whole lives wanting to experience. And yeah, it's exhilarating. Oh my God. When I was younger, I had that with two and a half other women in my life. But I was just crazy in love that way. You can't stop thinking about it. You write poems. I wrote music to them and hoping they'd sleep with me and all that stuff. But in that sense, Bree and I realized very quickly that this was healthier because we weren't being floated up off of our centers. We didn't lose our center with each other. And that's the point I want to make here. We just without doing any work or realizing what our issues were with each other yet, we realized she didn't sell out her truths to be with me, and I didn't sell out my truths to be with her. We stayed centered. Mm-hmm. And now we have a 17-year anniversary this year. But exactly what Joseph said is that our souls met first. In a way, it only took me 13 seconds to recognize her, the woman I've been waiting for my whole life. It took her a little longer, but she got it too. And we were drawn first by our same soul species without knowing it at that time. And we gradually, the whole point of romance, and we are, Bree and I and Joseph and his relationships and everybody who's in Edenity, they're meant to illuminate the whole modus operandi of our green, what we call our green protectors.
And the rigor and
green
symmetry with which they do that is amazing. Like, so, you know, we're bringing this concept of how you draw a partner for these reasons, but the experience of it really will blow your hair back, because you'll find all sorts of symmetries. And when I coined the term trigger storm, where one person triggers the other and then their reaction triggers the other, all of that is because of childhood wounds. And those trigger storms force you to work out how your wound, to the degree and the ways in which your wound mates.
Yes. Soulmates, sorry, everyone out there, they're true. They're right. They are real. But if you have this idea that a soulmate is this match made in heaven, Edenity has a little ditty. It says, soulmates are train wrecks made in heaven.
And while we're on this subject,
the trigger storm.
I want to shout out to Eric Grace, who was the first person to point out to me the virulent codependence in almost all love songs. And so hello to Eric, who is a regular listener. He also pointed out, he's like, if you substitute the mate object with God, then it actually works. It is a lot healthier. He told me that like 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. But like I think of Sting's iconic song "Every Breath You Take," which is completely, head over heels. And I think of "Come What May" from Moulin Rouge, which is this expression of like, like I've never seen the sky before, and there's the sense of like, now life has meaning because I've met you. And like, that's the thread, and that's what the protector looks like when it's falling in love, because the high that they can get off of it is so strong. They go, oh, with this juice, I can really repress the difficult emotions that I don't know what to do with.
Exactly.
That's how high I feel, and that's what's really going on.
Absolutely. And I've got to enter something, because you mentioned Sting here. There was always something about Every Breath You Take that felt creepy to me.
Oh, sure.
Because it looked like a codependent song. And then I saw an interview by him, and somebody asked him about that song, how a big smash it was. He said, yeah, but everybody misunderstood it. He said, it's about a stalker.
Oh, it was supposed to be?
It's about a stalker who every breath, every move you make.
Well, he does say you belong to me. That's pretty aggressive. You belong.
And he laughed while he said it. He says, and whoever interviewed him, I forget, said, well, you sang it so sweetly and sincerely. You sold it as real love. And he said, yeah, I know. I got carried away by the words myself.
Nice. There it is. That's what happened. I got another one on this subject. I heard an interview with Phil Collins about the song. Take a Look at Me Now. That's the parentheses part. You're the only one who ever knew me at all. That one.
Yes.
And he said he wrote that song to get a woman back who had ended a relationship with him, and it didn't work. But it was a hit song. I thought that was really ironic. But you're the only one who ever knew me at all. Like, well, that's kind of a problem then. If you've got all that in one basket, like that's supposed to be your parents or God, right? Like you're not supposed to put all of those eggs in that one basket and be dependent on this one person knowing you. That's the protector. This is where I was trying to get all of my needs met, and that can't work.
In that way, the very famous message and the arc of our romantic experiences, a globalized human collective. It's you and me against the world, babe.
Yeah.
That is as toxic as it gets, and yet it has been sold to us as the deepest kind of connect. But if there's only one person who knows you, in that way, just like Joseph said, you have made an addictive object out of your lover, And you will find
eventually that they don't know and feel you nearly as well as you're fantasizing they do. Because if they really did, then you'd never get into fights and no issues would come up, right? But that's the honeymoon phase of like, oh, this person gets me and feels me and we have all this in common, and all the things I didn't get from my parents, I'm now getting from them, parenthetically, right?
Oh, God.
Finally, my unmet needs have a place to land. And I really wish that were the case, and I'm going to hold on to that idea like my life depends on it until it all falls apart, and then I don't know what happened. And this is what we're talking about.
Did you get what, Joseph, that was so, did you get what Joseph just said here? Oh, I'm getting everything I need and love with you that I didn't get from my parents. Stop right there. Let's freeze that phrase for a moment. Meaning, you are sexualizing your relationship with a mother or father projection.
Yeah.
Wait, take that in, please. Whatever you didn't get in the deficit we all carry from childhood gets projected into romantic relationship, exactly as Joseph said it in Dayglow Orange. This is exactly the degree of the toxicity. So we're not taking away the romantic dream here. We want to give it authentic foundation and substance. I write poems to Bree 3 times a year. Just comes I'm so in love with her, and on every level things work with us.
And this also is related to, I'm sure we've talked about this probably half a dozen times already, but this is where the currency, the false currency of unconditional love comes in.
Oh, yes,
right. So this well-accepted societal idea that you're supposed to transact unconditional love with your romantic partner, which one is impossible, as discussed many times before, because we live in the realm of conditions. And two, well, where did that idea come from then? Because you needed something that, what do we call it? Meta-conditional love. That's what you needed from parents, which feels a lot more unconditional. But the crazy thing about this, I don't think we've said on this podcast before, is you fall in love with someone very conditionally, right?
Yes.
Because of the way they look, because of the way they make you laugh, because of the way they make you feel, because you have things in common. All those are fucking conditions. And so all of that's the case. And then somehow you're supposed to be loving each other unconditionally. So if they gain 200 pounds and you don't like the way they look anymore, you're supposed to, but one of the original conditions was that they only weighed 120 pounds and now they weigh 350 pounds. And you're supposed to keep loving them unconditionally. Why? Right?
Yeah.
Or if they, join a bizarre organization where they sacrifice goats every Friday night, you're supposed to keep loving them unconditionally. They have different values than you do now. So this explains why that.
Oh, great way of bringing that in. And if we take it off the weight issue for a moment and use another metaphor, what if your partner starts wanting to have other lovers in this polyamory thing that's such a now modern thing to do? Oh, come on, people have been doing this for 10,000 years. It's nothing new. But what if you want to stay exclusive and your husband or wife or your lover, your significant other doesn't? You're supposed to keep loving them unconditionally.
Yeah.
The value system between someone who wants to be monogamous and someone who wants to be polyamorous are other sides of the world. And so that's what we're going to be talking about that in our last premise next time. But this the basis for it to begin with is exactly this premise, that falling in love is not the solution to our problems. It's simply another version of our problems, as done by default by most of us. The only hope we can have here is Edenity. Not the only hope, but to have hope. Edenity targets this directly. We have couples in doing sessions together to do exactly what Joseph said. Use the good stuff in the healthier stuff in the relationship to demarcate and illuminate the not so healthy stuff. And when both are on board, you need both parties in on this, or you will not last. The bond will disintegrate. If one person starts doing EBE and another person doesn't, it's likely, depending, lots of factors, it's not absolute, but the tendency is that it won't work out in the end, not because of anything except differing value systems. It's just two people to transact a soulmate bond, they've got to share the same existential worldview. If they don't share, and situational worldview's got to be resonant at least, but they've got to share the same existential-based worldview where the value systems match. So the hunger to grow, commitment to grow is the existential worldview element that's necessary for a soulmate bond to detoxify itself on the way to health. So
it's just a little vignette. I met recently, briefly, a 26-year-old guy, and was with another person at the time, and he briefly talked about some woman who showed interest in him, and he said, like, yeah, I kind of want to be single right now. And the person asked a question like, well, you know, what happened with her? And he kind of looked up at the sky and he said, yeah, I just don't want to compromise. And it was really interesting. It was really, really interesting. And he talked a little bit more about it, and I sort of unpacked it in my own mind because it didn't make sense to go into his value system for various reasons. But what I saw was like, the younger generations are so naturally self-interested, so
yes.
they can't compromise the way the older generations have. And that's
Yes.
a good thing, except for if it's entitled, which it was partially for him. I could just feel it. And, you know, and he said something about like, yeah, for example, she wanted to do such and such, and I'm working on a book right now. And I could just tell if I had gone and done that with her, I would have resented her. And I was like, very good for a 26-year-old. But that's the beginning. But
why? Wait, why?
Right, why? That's the beginning of an investigation that you could talk about with your partner, so that you wouldn't have to compromise and you wouldn't have to resent, and you would find what is the co-creative thing you both should be doing or not on a deeper level. And so it was a really interesting moment I saw when he said, I don't want to compromise. I was like, oh, maybe these younger generations are dead ending the compromise thing, dead ending sooner. Yeah. So they're going to have to be delivered to, well, I don't know how to resolve this self versus other issue, you know, that therapists and philosophers have been trying to resolve for 5,000 years or whatever. And they're dead ending all of that. And, you know, maybe that helps them find identity, which would actually be able to address this conundrum he was in.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
You just make another point that we can make to bring into the dimension of this premise. And that is, as we said in earlier podcasts, psychologists don't like to get into the domain of value systems of their clients. If according to classical psychology, well, modern, even neo-classical, if you start screwing with a person's value systems, then you're cultic. And we're going to do a separate whole series on cultism soon, after we're done with these three hoods.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, we are. It's coming up again for me, that way to talk about. But the point here is that in that sense, you can't do emotively mature romance if the two partners aren't more emotively mature. And the absolute pivot of resonance between two souls is their value systems. So if you're a psychologist and one person is saying that, well, my values here are monogamal, and maybe they're religious, maybe they're not. Humanists can be monogamous too, folks. It's not just religionists who want to feel about monogamy. We're going to talk about monogamy next podcast as our last premise.
Right.
But in that sense, psychologists want to steer clear of addressing value systems and allow people to find healing inside their present value system, unless it changes by itself. Then a couple of therapists, especially Gestalt therapists, they will roll with the evolution of your value system. Edenity takes a little bit of a more brave stance, as here's a value system to test, not to believe in. To test, and this value system, based on emotive primacy, will deliver you to the deepest relationship you can have with existence at this moment in time in your incarnational arc, and with your humanness. Test that claim. We're confident we can deliver it to anyone who's curious enough to tear down and rebuild their, or at least remodel their values.
I started laughing because I just saw yet another item on the list of why identity is so unpopular relative to what we were talking about before, because to revelatory religionists, it looks indulgently selfish, and not groundedly moral. Right. To secular relativists, it threatens their independence because it looks like a top down, there's an objective reality, there are rules to follow, and that offends their sense of self.
Oh, great.
I never
That's
thought
so
of that
good.
before. It's
Right.
kind of despairing, like, because that's so much of the world. They can't, if you can't make that and, then a value system that makes that and is going to be threatening. That's kind of a problem.
Joseph, I haven't thought of this in 30 years. You remind me of the moment that I got what you just said.
Uh-huh.
That was the moment when I started to want to be a philosopher.
Right.
Because I got how deeply, so this is such a radical departure of value system that there's no way anybody in this planet's going to be ever interested in it. Right. And I'd already walked away from the singer-songwriter. And that night I made friends with the bottom of a whole bottle of wine, I remember.
I believe it.
And went to bed fitfully upset because I could not escape how compelling it was, how unlikely this paradigm would ever go out into the world. And I was staking not just my own heart and soul on it, I was staking my financial life on it. Yeah. How am I ever going to make enough money in this world with it when I've aligned myself with a paradigm? I'm aligning it and me together that is so deeply confronts the value systems of this world that it's almost comical.
Yeah.
It's almost comical.
In ways people don't track. They just go, this doesn't really feel good to me. You know, I just talked to a person, here's a good illustration of that. I just talked to a person today who's been, let's say, hanging around my, he's been a member and hanging around my teaching for a while, which includes Edenity's teaching in many ways. And he reminded me today that he's listened to like every talk I've ever done and done all my online courses and stuff. He hasn't yet listened to the Heart of Soul podcast, I'm pretty sure. But he reminded me that he'd said a while back, he's like, yeah, I really agree with a lot of what you say, but the childhood wounding thing never really made sense to me. And then in our conversation, yeah, I know. Well, I prior to a year or two ago when you and I were sort of on a break, it turned out I didn't talk much about it. And now I talk about it a lot. And so it got him curious. And then we sort of found through some explorations today that he had a picture that his childhood was actually pretty good. And then we started to pull that apart a little bit. And he started to see like, oh, it wasn't nearly as good as he thought. And it's like, oh, well, there you go. So we reframe some of these things that happened to you, and you start to see, actually, that wasn't love. That was actually kind of manipulative, that thing that happened there. Can you feel that? Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. And then it becomes evident that it's his protector who thought his childhood was pretty good, and then based values like, I don't have to work on my childhood issues on that. And that's the way Edenity sees it, is what's so challenging of values, because I don't think we've said this explicitly today, but the values are very much what the protector uses to seal in your wounding.
Yes, exactly.
And so when you have a therapeutic paradigm that doesn't, at least, not necessarily directly challenge, but is seeking to examine absolutely everything and isn't afraid of challenging values.
Yes.
If it's afraid or tentative about doing that, then you're doing therapy on the protector's terms.
Yes.
Therefore, you're only helping them to improve their coping mechanisms. Yes. And that's not what we do. We're doing something completely different. And just like that, in just 20 seconds there, it's not often appreciated even by therapists. Like, if you say it to a therapist, like, oh, well, what kind of work do you do with people? And they go, blah, 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 blah. And you go, oh, so you're helping people cope better.
Yeah.
They often don't get that.
No, they don't.
They don't realize they're exchanging one set of dysfunctional or less functional coping mechanisms for better ones. They think that's what a healthy human is. And we go, no, that's just an improved protector. There's nothing authentic about it. And we do it deconstructively. Therefore, you have to get interested in what values are actually real. And then you invoke the revelatory side of things, the objectively real values, not, it's your reality, you can interpret it however you want, subjectivistic stuff that is so dominant today. Yeah.
Cue the thing I've mentioned, I think, once or twice in these 90 podcasts. When in an early talk I gave, a psychiatrist stood up and said,
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that your process helps people decompensate? He's a very well-known psychiatrist. And I said, absolutely. And he recoiled in horror and said, you're going to wind up with people with not being able to cope anymore. How can you justify that? This you're going to put people in mental hospitals. And my only reply to him, I said, if I were you in the database that you have, I would say the same thing to me, because there's something else beyond your experience that I'm offering here that I'm trying to get across, that we don't do that willy-nilly. It's a gradual, it's just like I remember using the metaphor of whatever they call, I forget it at the moment, when you're deep diving and then you have to just be in the tank to normalize your nitrogen and decompression. Yeah. It's a slow decompression. There's no demand to lose other value systems. New ones emerge as the realization, as you just said about this young man, when you realize that your value systems are largely in the hands of the protector, which makes them toxically neurotic by definition. And so if there isn't like the eyes to see through that, as you say, in regular therapy land, then all you're going to do is help people cope, mostly. And the best metaphor I have for that is, we say this one often in different situations, you're halfway up the mountain and you get stalled at a certain altitude. And then you just walk around the mountain over and over again and seeing views change all the time. Like, wow, I'm really growing. When all you're doing is going around the same altitude with an infinite amount of moments that you could, because by the time you walk around the whole mountain, it might be autumn now, and now you've got another whole new. This is all
collecting insights that don't integrate.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, one more to go.
Yeah.
I'll read it out loud just to get people pissed off. How is he going to justify this? I'm just going to read it. That's all, and we'll bring your protests to the table next time you listen. Yes. Committed monogamy. I'm saying it again. Committed monogamy is the only form of sexual expression that challenges our deepest fears of emotive surrender and risk. And as such, uncommitted, casual sexual behavior in adults, not teenagers when you got to learn yourself, learn your body, in adults is an addictive, unconscious flight from the terror of real intimacy. Making polyamory, if you're into that, stick with it till it dead ends for you. But it's privatizing the benefit and
socializing the risk,
collectivizing the risk. You're just insurance policies, so you're never really hurt. You're not conscious of that till you're conscious of it. But that's what we're going to talk about next time, and bring in the revelatory and the existential, the moral relativism, the subjective and objective into that presentation. So it's not, don't do this because we say so. That would be the worst thing you could do. But follow it through with us and see if any of it makes sense. And we're happy to ask the 1,000 questions that come out of it. I have fantasies of doing a whole week on that premise alone with people in a seminar, for a week-long seminar. It would take that long to unpack all the complexity.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
So that's what we're going to talk about next time. Juicy stuff. It involves sex. So maybe take a listen.
Yeah, I'll definitely put sex in the title so that people will be more likely to click on it. So now there's a great example. Like, doing that would be a both essentialism and existentialism based inquiry. Like, why should I include sex in that? What would be my motive for doing that? And all of that. I think about this kind of stuff when I crank out the copy for the titles and whatnot. Usually I just use intuition because it's otherwise too hard, but I think about it.
You bet.
Thank you, Stace. Thank you, listeners.
All right.
Tune in next time for more of your value system to be challenged. And until then, we wish you well with everything. Bye for now.
Yes and yes and yes.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.